right, so let's start then. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining Pandemic Punditry's discussion with Dr. Sandhya Sriram, the CEO of Shiok Meats. This conversation will be streaming via Zoom and Facebook Live today. Please send in any questions you have to Sandhya by typing them in either the comment section on Facebook or in the Q&A area on Zoom. Karthika will moderate these questions for us. We have a very limited time today, so I don't think we can get to a lot of questions, but if there's a very pertinent one, she will ask that from Sandhya. Sandhya, welcome to Pandemic Punditry.
Thank you. Very amusing photo of me sitting next to the bioreactor. So thanks for that. Thanks for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. So how do we do this? Should I just start off with a brief introduction of what Shiok?
Yeah, actually, what we were going to ask you, and we can stop sharing the slides, Karthika, was just to ask you maybe because, I mean, our audience is quite varied and they're probably not very conversant with, cell-based meats and why it even exists in the first place. So maybe if you can take a few minutes and explain the concept of cell-based meats.
Sure. So I can start off by saying that cell-based meats is practically biologically, chemically, physically the same thing as meats that comes from a dead animal, but except that it doesn't come from a dead animal. It doesn't have the overload of antibiotics that generally your slaughterhouses and shrimp farms or fish farms have. It doesn't have accumulation of microplastics. It doesn't have accumulation of heavy metals in terms of seafood. It is less harmful to the environment in terms of energy costs, energy consumption, water consumption, or land consumption, for that example. We can do cell-based meats vertically. You can grow all your farms, cell-based farms, vertically rather than horizontally. Right. Very simple picture, and everybody can actually go onto our website later on to look at this infographic. But essentially what we have compared cell-based meats is to greenhouse plants and vegetables. So what you do in a greenhouse is you take a part of a plant, a part of a leaf, stem, root, whatever it is, and then you put it in a greenhouse, which is a conducive, controlled environment with humidity, temperature, water, soil, nutrition, whatever you feed the plants. And at the end of a couple of months or weeks, what you get is the same fruit, same vegetable, same plant that you would eat, which was grown in an agricultural land. But it's done in a controlled environment so that weather doesn't affect it, or there's pest control, for example. You don't have to spray as much pesticides in a greenhouse because it's controlled and it's covered, whereas in the agricultural land, that's a problem. So similar to that, what we do with cell-based meats is we take stem cells from an animal, live animal. You don't have to kill the animals. Stem cells have this amazing capability to grow on and on. Every one of us, every organ of our body has stem cells, and they're essentially this miracle cell that can keep growing and at the same time form every organ of your body. So what we essentially do at Shiok is we work on crustaceans, so which is shrimp, crab, lobster, prawn. So what we do is we isolate the muscle stem cells from shrimp. We put them in a conducive environment similar to the animal's body. So we basically trick the cells to think that they're still inside the animal's body by providing the same temperature, the pressure, the gases, and the nutrition, and so on. And at the end of 4 to 6 weeks, these stem cells essentially grow into what they are meant to grow, which is the meat. And that's how they form the animal, for example. So what we get at the end of 4 to 6 weeks is minced shrimp meat, and which tastes exactly the same as shrimp. We don't do any manipulations on the taste because it is inherent in the cells. The nutrition is inherent, so we don't have to worry about the protein content or the amino acid or the fat content, for example. But we can make it more nutritious if we want us to. For example, can we add more omega-3 fatty acids?
Cholesterol or something like that? If I'm just saying you could manipulate it that way if you desire.
Yeah. So can we reduce the cholesterol and increase the omega-3 fatty acids? Yes, we can. So, we can make it customized food if you want as well, if you're willing to pay that price, for example. But for the mass market, we keep it as natural as it can be, in the sense that, comparing nutrition between regular shrimp and cell-based shrimp, it's exactly the same amount of protein, or even sometimes larger amount of protein on the cell-based side. So it's essentially not trying to make a fake or a substitute or an artificial meat. It is real meat, except that we don't have to kill animals for it. You don't have to clear out mangroves for setting up shrimp farms. You don't have to go into the ocean to catch the shrimps. It's actually made in a brewery-like facility, but instead of brewing your beer, you're brewing meats. That's exactly what Shiok Meats
Your
is.
friendly shrimp brewery on the side of every.
Yeah. So have your beer and have your shrimp along with it, or have a glass of wine with your lobster. So makes sense. Yeah.
So, one thing I found, sort of disturbing and, fascinating at the same time when I was doing research for this conversation we're going to have today is the sheer amount of like habitat destruction that shrimp and aquaculture has done.
Yes.
I mean, it was all of us know about the factory farms and the wet markets and all of that contributing to all kinds of issues we're suffering from right now. But very few people may be aware of the sort of severe destruction that we are seeing. I mean, for example, maybe the pandemic is not happening, but 23,000 commercial ships are walking around, going around our oceans, and they've destroyed like 1/3 of all commercial fish stocks, right? And then the remaining 95% of them are in dire straits. I mean, so it's just a horrendous story, and I was shocked to hear that,
Yes.
And I heard that.
So
Yeah,
honestly, on the red and white meat side, it's more of factory farming where you are actually setting up farms to, grow these animals, which is completely unethical and cruel. But
Right.
on the seafood side, there's two aspects to it. One is where factory farming is also done, shrimp farms, lobster and crab cannot be farmed very efficiently. So it's more on shrimp and fish farms. But
Right.
these are actually appalling, disgusting farms. And I have, personally visited some of the larger ones in Thailand and Vietnam, and I can't even explain how they were, dirty, filthy, cleaned with antibiotics and bleach. Your shrimps are cleaned with bleach. That's how they are. That's on the farming side. On the seafood, on the ocean caught, wild caught side, what you mentioned is correct. There's thousands of ships around the world doing this. And they have these huge nets that are called shrimp trawlers attached to the back of the boats.
Right.
And they have a 1:20 bycatch, which means 1 kilogram of shrimp leads to 20 kilograms of other sea animals and plants being killed in that process. So how can you even justify those numbers given that we only have so much of wildlife in the world? It just doesn't make sense to me. Yeah.
I mean, it's a staggering amount of, and we'll have I put all the research in a slide deck, and we will actually post that along with this copy of this video for all our participants as well. But it's just, I mean, it was mind-boggling, and your site has some of that information as well. And it's just, I was flabbergasted. So, a question that a lot of people ask me is, hey, is this going to look like the same shrimp? Is going to have legs and shells and all that?
No.
Same thing.
Yeah.
So one thing is, no, it's not going to look like the full shrimp. So honestly, nobody eats a full shrimp per se. Nobody eats the legs. You have to deshell it. You have to devein it, which itself is a big problem on its own. And a lot of people don't like doing it. So we are actually giving you a product that's already deshelled, deveined, and clean. So yes, eventually it will look like a deshelled shrimp, the C shape, the color, the cuts that you see, all of it. But at this point, we are working on a minced product. So it can be used in dumplings, your momos, noodles, soups, rice, and those kind of dishes. But we are doing R&D on a structured product. But we don't intend to grow the legs or the shell or the head, because
that's a waste.
Do it, and it's going to be a waste at the end of the day. And again, you have to take care of the waste. And why even grow something that people don't eat? Yeah.
So is it the concept of scaffolding that I've heard? I mean, so I think, the process is you create the self-proliferation in this, ideal condition, very much similar to, I guess, the equivalent of a womb or of a shrimp, I guess. And then you have the scaffolding. So maybe so scaffolding is what gives the texture and the sort of the firmness of the meat, or am I wrong?
Right. So scaffolding is just a fancy name for support. That's it. So when you build a building, you put together a scaffold, which is your, iron rods, and you set up a skeletal system for a building. Similarly, for these cells inside of the animal's body, they have a support system in terms of, skin or collagen or bones or whatever it is. And then they form their structures on top of that. But given that we are growing these cells in a bioreactor, again, a fancy name for a pressure cooker, literally, is that you have to provide them with a system or a support system. So scaffolds can be 3D printed from plant materials. They can be plant materials themselves. It can be, what we are using is hydrogels, which is just imagine an aloe vera sort of gel, a plant extract that's translucent of sorts, that can be put into a mold, and then you put your cells inside, and then the cells grow into it. So essentially it forms the structure of a shrimp as it would form inside of an animal's body. Because for seafood, scaffolds don't work better because seafood is more springy and 3D in dimension, whereas red and white meat is more layer, so you can do scaffolds. So it's just a fancy name for a support system and nothing else. And ideally, all of us are looking at a plant-based, neutral support scaffold, which doesn't have any taste per se. Because then if you have a plant-based scaffold that tastes like, let's say, grass, and then you're going to, grow your chicken meat on that, then it's going to affect the flavor. So we're looking at a neutral flavored scaffold system at that sense. Yeah.
Sandhya, we just have a question come through from Prasad. Thanks, Prasad, for joining us today. So Prasad's question is, so if cells are taken from marine aqua versus those taken from controlled cultivation, then the taste of Shiok meat will change according to the cells behind the final output.
Right. So yes, we have been getting questions on what about, for example, for us, I think, yes, what's the difference in the taste between shrimps that are grown in freshwater versus seawater, for example. On the red meat side, it's more like grass-fed versus corn-fed cows, how it does affect the flavor. Really? So for us, yes, it does. It does affect, so diet does affect the flavor of your meat to an extent. So what we do, for example, is if we are going after wild-caught shrimp, which is from the oceans, we actually add salinity to the nutritional solution that we feed the cells. So that actually increases. We also add algal and seaweed extracts. So that actually gives that ocean taste that you...
To mimic the taste, I see.
Exactly. So are you saying that in this cell-based meat, you could actually say, okay, if you're catching this, the prawns off the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico are the best tasting prawns in the world or something. I'm just... You could actually take the out of the seawater there and then make the shrimp taste just like the
yes, you can. Yes, it's very much possible. A lot of the red and white meat companies are looking at that as well. For example, for their beef specifically, because beef does have varied, types of beefs that are out there based on what the cows are fed. So it is, I would say it's more of a delicacy rather than a need right now. So our immediate need is to work around a product that's highly rich in protein, rich in nutrition, at least has the basal taste of shrimp in it, which is inherent in the cells. But yes, if you want to customize it, if you want this exquisite variety from Japan or, from off the coast of Australia or something like that, it is definitely possible to do that.
So, I mean, when we first heard about this, I mean, the first time I actually was exposed to this was in Star Trek, right? Food replicator, right? So, I mean, we're essentially talking about Star Trek in some form or another coming to fruition. What is the timeline for you in terms of when this would happen for your company? I know you're in R&D right now. So when are you?
It's honestly not sci-fi anymore. Yes, it used to be sci-fi. It's actually happening. Like, for example, I've eaten the meats that we grow. My team, my co-founders, my investors have tasted it. So I can comfortably say around the world about 20 people have tasted cell-based shrimp up until now. And hopefully that number increases as we pass by. But so we are looking at a timeline between 2021, end of 2021 to start of 2022 to commercially launch it in Singapore, starting off.
That's early. Wow.
Yes. So we are actually in the midst of raising funds to set up our first manufacturing plant currently. So given the timelines, we are looking at a commercially viable product that can be sold to consumers by early 2022. So we're not very far away. Initially, it will be only in Singapore. So yes, you'll have to fly here to taste it. But eventually, we are looking at expanding into various markets in the Asia-Pacific sphere to start off with, and then eventually going into Europe and US. Yeah.
One of the challenges I think all of the cell-based companies have had in the past is this, currently your 1 kilo retails for $5,000, or I read that somewhere, for $5,000. So how, is this just economies of scale that will dramatically bring the price down?
Yeah, okay, two things for this, or rather 3 reasons. One reason is we are at the R&D scale, so things are very expensive to start off with, so hence the $5,000. But given that, the second reason for the expensive price is actually 90% of our cost is this nutritional soup, which is called cell culture media in scientific language, that we feed these stem cells. It's
Okay.
nothing but a mix of proteins, carbohydrates, sugars, amino acids, vitamins, and minerals that are essentially in the broken down form that the cells can absorb themselves. So, for example, you can't directly take algae and feed these cells because these cells don't have a digestive system to digest it and absorb. So you have to give them a broken down component of that protein that the cells can absorb as they would inside of the animal's body after the digestion process takes place.
Okay.
So these ingredients currently are only manufactured by food and feed companies for large scale production of food or by pharmaceutical companies. So these food and feed companies don't want to work with us at this point because what we are asking for is probably a kilo a month in terms of that. So the scale doesn't work for them. They are used to selling tons and tons of kilos a month. But what's happened in the last couple of years is companies like us have managed to form long-term collaborations with these companies, looking at collaborative R&D to see how their products can fit into our research and so on. The other side is where we can easily get it is from pharmaceutical companies, but as you know, they are 100 times the price. They are meant to be for healthcare and for stem cell therapy and organogenesis, not meant to be for food. So none of them are edible. Edible in the sense they're all chemically synthesized or extracted from animals, which again beats the purpose of cell-based meats. So
Correct.
Given this, that's why our 90% of our cost is the soup. And right now we're buying the soup from pharmaceutical companies, unfortunately. But what we have successfully done in the last couple of months is we have actually partnered up with one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies to make the world's first edible shrimp stem cell media. So this is going to be 100 times lower in cost. And that's where we are going to get to $50 a kilogram by end of this year, start of next year. And hence that's when we'll get into the market. There's no way that I'm going to launch a product that's $5,000 or even $500 a kilogram to start off with for shrimp. So that's essentially what's happening. Finally, the ancillary industries have identified that it's high time they wake up and support cell-based meat industries. And they look at how they can bring down the prices substantially and how they can support this entire industry. Moving further into manufacturing, I am looking at producing hundreds of tons of kilogram of meat per day, So
Right.
that's when the economies of scale comes in and we actually start reducing further prices to a point where it can be even cheaper than the existing shrimp prices that's in the market currently.
Wow.
At the same time, you're giving a sustainable, healthy, or cleaner product to the consumers, even though it's, even though it's so clean and everything, the price can be lower than what you see in the original market. So what we foresee as cell-based meats founders and people who work in this industry is in the future, around 15, 20 years down the line, when our kids or us walk into a supermarket and we want to buy meat, the options that you would go for is either plant-based or cell-based meats. And
Yeah.
meat that comes from a slaughterhouse will actually be so highly priced that you wouldn't opt for it. So that will become sort of a premium specialty product, commodity that's hardly available. So that's essentially what we foresee the future to be.
And I think the indications, the predictions I've seen is by 2045 that cell and plant-based meats will have a larger portion of the market. But that was, I think, before this whole pandemic happened also, right? So, and I think a lot of attention has been, the last call on alternative meats, alternative proteins have equal in one quarter in 2020 is more than what it was in the whole year 2019, right?
Exactly.
So, a lot of money being pumped in for good reason. I think this is obviously the future. So, I'm curious to hear that, this process of sort of bringing the price down. If you're at $50 a kilo in a year, at scale, as you're talking about, you're definitely on the way to sort of making this much cheaper. Especially if you remove all the shells. The weight of the shrimp is always the heads, the tails, and everything you put in it, right? So, that's amazing.
Sandhya, how do you see it impacting like the fine dining industry?
Actually, our first set of target markets is fine dining. So it is starting off with premium high-end restaurants. The reason being, those are the restaurants that would, eventually, or those are the restaurants that have historically looked at sustainable products. They are the ones who are willing to try different types of products. Those are the restaurants that launched Impossible and Beyond, for example, in different parts of the world. They have celebrity chefs who can do the marketing for you as well. support you in your branding, in your product, and even give you constructive feedback on, how to improve the product. What can you do better? So our first target market is restaurants, and then eventually going to supermarkets somewhere 7-10 years down the line. Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, I know that there's a general perception around, and I think this is early, right? I mean, when you ask people questions before a product is actually even commercially available, the answers are sort of skewed. So a lot of people have been asked these questions. I think GFI has done a survey where it says, are you going to, when it's available, are you going to actually eat cell-based meat? I think there's mixed reviews on that, depending on the part of the world the question is asked.
Yes, depends on the part of the world for sure. So I can speak for Asia. So we have done our own surveys. We've looked at what GFI has done as well. And consistently, we see an average 70 to 80% of the people say that they would at least try it once and then make up their minds whether they want to. I think, proceed with it. But, at the end of the day, it's food. It has to taste right and the price has to be right. So whatever you speak about sustainability, health, animal cruelty, ethical, all of it, at the end of the day, if your product doesn't taste good, nobody's going to come back and buy it. It's food. I mean, it's human tendency to eat tasty food, and that's what we look for. And also, when it comes to food, people like familiarity. So I am not, making a product that people aren't familiar with at all. I'm actually making a product that they're used to eating, that they know how it tastes. So my idea is make a product that's as close to what people are used to eating, and then start looking at some, weird or different kind of product that you want to work on, that you can launch into the elite/affluent market to start off with, and so on. Yeah.
So we just have a question come through from Jeevan. Jeevan, thanks for joining us today. What new tech are you seeing in food quality tech, especially in your domain?
So I think the latest trend in the cell-based meats is not having any more cell-based meat companies coming up, but actually ancillary companies coming up. For example, companies that can make this nutrition products cheaper, companies that can produce cheaper bioreactors or these vessels that we grow our cells in, companies that can help us with the engineering side, design side of things, all of that. So I'm glad that that's happening, because honestly, I think we shouldn't have any more new cell-based meat companies coming up. We've kind of hit that threshold where we have enough right now, looking at every type of meat and so on. But I think we definitely need more companies helping us on the other aspects. We need more food tech, food science specialists to help us with that part, because at the end of the day, it is food. It's not going to be technology. It's going to be food that people put on their plates and eat, literally. So we need all of those ancillary industries coming up for sure.
So if that happens, can you get to market faster?
Oh, definitely, yes. I mean, see, given that we've just partnered up with one pharmaceutical firm, has accelerated our path to market by a year or 2 years, for example. We started the company only in 2018, and we're looking at a launch in 2022. It's less than 4 years from the time we started. Whereas companies that started, for example, the first ever cell-based meat company was Memphis Meats, that was started in 2014 or 15, if I'm not wrong. And they are looking at commercialization along the time that we are looking at it. The reason, because they were the only company at that time, such a new technology, nobody was supporting or collaborating. They basically had to bring up all the collaborations. So they did, I'm so thankful to Memphis Meats and their founders, but they did a lot of groundwork for us before we came on board and, started off accelerating the industry.
Let me ask a personal question. So, how did you get, what was the inspiration behind you doing this? I know you're trained in the food side, but what inspired you to do this?
So I'm a stem cell scientist by training, education. Throughout, I think, the last 13 years of my life, I've been dealing with stem cells, and I've always been fascinated by them. And in 2014 or 15, when I first came to know about cell-based meats, when Dr. Mark Post came up with the first hamburger in Netherlands and showcased it in the UK, I was intrigued, because I was growing stem cells to grow organs, but he essentially was growing stem cells to grow organs to eat it as food, which made perfect sense, because you don't have to grow the entire animal. You only grow part of the animal that you eat. Who eats a whole cow? Nobody eats a whole cow. And you grow the cow for 5-10 years, feed it all this grass and plants that humans can eat, and then you kill it, and then you eat parts of it, and the rest goes into other industries or into waste or whatever it is. So I think that kind of blew a huge bulb in my brain. And I still remember I was in the lab growing some stem cells and I was like, can I eat this? What will happen? But I didn't. But it did cross my mind. I mean, as a scientist, you are slightly crazy always. But that's what it is. And it started off from there. So what I did was went into this deep dive kind of obsession into reading about cell-based meats, spoke to Mark Post, spoke to Memphis, spoke to the initial companies, understood their mission and vision behind starting these companies. And start of 2018, I said, yeah, well, it's time for me to do this. And let me concentrate on a protein that Asians eat. And for me, it was seafood. I've been a vegetarian all my life, never tasted seafood in my life, never tasted red or white meat as well. But you know what, it just intrigued me. And I said, why not put my skill and technology and my passion into it and provide the consumers with still meat and seafood, but just without, killing animals and making it sustainable. Yeah.
Just one final audience question from Sanjogita. Thanks for joining us today. So what Sanjogita wants to know is, eventually, will there be any ethical concerns with regards to cell-based meat?
No, so nobody has actually picked up any ethical concerns because in this case, you don't kill animals. So that's the first thing. The next thing is, even if so in our case, Shiok Meats as such doesn't do any genetic manipulations to the cells. But there are other companies that are doing it, but they're making sure that the final product has no GM in it, for example. I mean, at this point, if you've eaten corn, tomato, or eggplant, you've definitely eaten GM. So, given that, I think the debate over GM kind of ends there. But no, there is no ethical questions to that. And I think the second question she asked was, how do you physically scale up production? So yeah, it's economies of scale. It's like doing physics, chemistry, and math all together. It's literally like taking any drug out of the lab and making it in large scale, or a vaccine taking out of the lab, making it in large scale, or making chocolate in large scale, or making bread, beer, wine in large scale, literally. And that's what it is. Yeah, it's a mix of food science along with biotech. Yeah.
I think, I mean, you made a very interesting point earlier, which is that, if you were a startup, interested in sort of getting into this space, what you're essentially saying is, hey, help build the ecosystem around our industry, right? Yeah. And I think the advice would also apply to, I mean, I'm sure you're looking for talented people to join the field. But that must be a constraint to your growth, I'm assuming. Or is there a lot of people in food tech that can?
No, so interestingly, a lot of people with a lot of skills don't recognize that they're actually a good fit for this industry. So anyone who has ever done cell biology, who has ever done bioprocess engineering, who has ever done mechanical engineering, chemical engineering, actually fits into this industry. Because you know what, we have enough scientists, enough stem cell scientists, enough cell biologists around the world. What we lack is engineers who can use their skills in the biology food side of things. So honestly, I would expect mechanical, chemical, bioprocess engineers to start thinking differently and see how their skills will fit this industry. Honestly, you don't have to understand stem cells. All you need to understand is numbers. How do you scale up production? How do you build a plant? And those are the people that are very hard to find, honestly. Oh. And we have had to go and do road shows and tell these people that, you know what, your skills perfectly fit. You can learn about stem cells. You can learn about biology from us, but it's very hard to learn engineering on the other side. So okay. They have the skill, so they can tie up with us to actually help us build the facilities, scale up the technologies, look at manufacturing, QA, QC, packaging, labeling, all of that. Yeah.
How can AI help you? It's a very high level question, but what role can AI play for?
See, at the end of the day, AI is anything that helps with automation. So for us, our entire manufacturing plant, we want it to be 100% automated, in the sense that, with a push of a button, the cells go into the bioreactor. Another push of a button, the nutritional solution comes in. Another push, it starts mixing. And then a couple of buttons and monitors to make sure that it runs properly for the next couple of weeks. There's no contamination because we don't use antibiotics. So you have to keep monitoring it. And at the end of 4 to 6 weeks, another push of a button to remove the liquid, have the meat, package it, and then take it. So all these solutions we can actually learn from the pharmaceutical industry as well as food technology. So right. It's this industry is such in the crux of food and biopharma, but it's a new field. So you have to learn to merge both together. You have to learn to think differently if you've been in the pharma industry, because you have to unsophisticate yourself a little bit to the food scale. But if
Yeah.
you're in the food industry, sophisticate yourself a little more into the biopharma scale. And that's where you're in the middle. Exactly. Yeah.
Excellent. I think we are almost at time, Sandhya. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I think I've learned a ton. I mean, I consider myself a quasi knowledgeable about both plant and cell-based meat because I have a interest in it, a personal interest in it, and so does Karthika as well. But it's actually, I mean, I've learned a ton, and I'm hoping a lot of our audience members have as well. So
Yeah.
thank you for taking the time off. I know you're a very busy person, despite the fact that we are in sort of lockdowns all over the world, producing this to get to market soon. So thank you so much for joining us, and look forward to eating this in Singapore at some point.
Thank you. Yeah, definitely. Thank you. I'm happy that I was part of this. So if anybody has any questions, they can, write on our Facebook page or Instagram, whatever it is.
We'll have a few unanswered questions, Sandhya. I'll post it on your Facebook page.
Sure. Sounds good. Perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Have a good day.
Thank you.